I'm Chef Walter Staib, and this is George and Mother Washington's estate, Mount Vernon. Let me give you a tour to the gardens, the home, and the stables. And even show you some of their favorite dishes to bring you a taste of history. It's very difficult to explain to you the excitement I feel being here at Mother and George Washington's Mount Vernon estate. Being in this kitchen just makes me get goosebumps, envisioning all the big events that happened. So, having said that, I want to show some great recipes that I know George and Mother both enjoyed many a times here at Mount Vernon. And it's very befitting that I make a roasted beef marrow, corn and molasses bread, baked stuffed sturgeon with citrus vinaigrette, and roasted vegetables and potatoes. For the first recipe today, I'm doing something that is forgotten in our diets. A lot of French restaurants still serve it the world over, but it's something that kind of got out of style, and it's a beef marrow. What you want to do, you want to clean the marrow by just taking a paring knife and kind of scraping off the excess and some of the cartilage that's on the side, just about like that. Then you want to put it in salt water for at least ideally a day or two. Change the water frequently. All you want to do, you stick the marrow on your roasting pan. Really simple, just about like so. And all it's going to get is some salt. You want to use nice coarse salt over it and a good amount of pepper. And this is all it needs. Now, when you make this at home, it takes a while because the bone takes a while to heat. And just imagine how many great meals were produced in these beehive ovens here during the heydays of the Mount Vernon estate. The oven should be, I'd say, about 425 degrees, about 20 minutes. Spectacular. When you serve it, there's a couple of ways of doing it. One, for a nice presentation, just put it on a plate. I add a little bit more black pepper on it. Then, any kind of herbs will work. The chervil has a beautiful, beautiful aroma. Put this a little bit on top. Is when you take the anadama bread, or the cornmeal and molasses bread, you have the bread on the plate, and you take the marrow, and you spoon it right onto the bread. A little bit of coarse salt right on top. It's rich in calories, but tremendous amount of flavor. And it's just the way you'd had it. Now, in the 18th century, and even still today, where I come from in the Black Forest, people believe that marrow gives you the strength of the ox where it's from. Oh, it's sensational, sensational flavor. Bread in the 18th century played a major part in dining. Matter of fact, the bread I'm making today, which is the cornmeal and molasses, thank God I have my chef de cuisine Bill here. That's going to help me. Bill, good to be here.
Thank you.
Was a bread that was made many a times in the cold winters in Valley Forge by Ludwig, who was the general baker for General Washington. So I'd assume that this bread would have made its way down here. It's an easy bread to make. I want to just show you really quick. Matter of fact, Bill is going to go through while I tell you even more. So Bill, go ahead and put it together because it takes no time to make it.
First thing we want to do is we have our dry active yeast and we want to bloom that. I start off with about 10 ounces, cup and a quarter of water. And then I'll put in my yeast, stir it up a little bit. To that, I'm going to add 3 ounces of cornmeal, 3 ounces of molasses, and 3 ounces of oil. Just want to give this a few seconds for the yeast to come alive. You can smell it right now. You can smell the yeast coming up and it's starting to foam. I'm going to add in 2 1/4 pounds of all-purpose flour. And I'm going to stir this together. It just starts to come together as a ball.
When he has the ball ready, like so, the most important part of it, you gotta let it rise. Now, it can rise if it's really, really cold. You have to have the right room temperature for it to rise. But 20 minutes to
About
half an
20
hour.
minutes, half an hour, depending on how warm your kitchen is.
When you cook it like we cook it, you have a beautiful crust on the bottom. And what you do is you just take the bread when it's risen, like we said, about 20 minutes. This one here, what temperature?
350 degrees.
So when it's doubled in size, put it on your peel. Bill, stick it in the oven for me. Now, you have the luxury here in Mount Vernon today to work with a beehive, which most people don't have. So it works exactly the same way in your oven. So it's a spectacular tasting bread. It works good, obviously, for my recipe, the beef marrow, but it works good with everything. And something that would have been most likely served here in Mount Vernon many times.
This is the Piazza at Mount Vernon. George Washington once described Mount Vernon as the most pleasantly situated estate in America. And when you're standing here, it's easy to see why. All around us are sweeping views of the Potomac River. In the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson wrote of the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is what George Washington had in mind, his life here at Mount Vernon on the Potomac.
I stopped by to have tea with Martha. What time does the gentleman normally get up on the day?
Oh, he is a farmer, remember, and has always kept his farmer's hours. He's abed by 9 o'clock and generally up about 4. He'll leave our chamber quietly and tiptoe down the back steps to dress himself and shave himself in the study, just so I can rest a little longer.
Every morning when George Washington arose, he came to this room. He dressed here, he shaved here. He did a lot of his correspondence here. One of his favorite possessions is this fan chair. If you sat in the chair, you could use the foot pedal to make the fan above you go back and forth and keep you cool. This was the chair that Washington used throughout his presidency, and so think of all the important decisions that were made right here in this very chair. One of the most treasured artifacts here at Mount Vernon is the key to the Bastille, the famous French prison in Paris, which was destroyed as one of the beginning events of the French Revolution in 1789. The key was sent to General Washington by his good friend Lafayette, who was at that time in charge of some of the French forces, and it was one of Washington's most treasured possessions, symbolizing his role as sort of a hero of freedom and liberty throughout the world. He received it when he was president in Philadelphia, brought it back to Mount Vernon, and it's been hanging here ever since. This is the bed on which George Washington died in December of 1799. He had been riding around his farms, as was his custom, and the weather was very raw and cold. He caught a chill. It was some kind of throat infection which effectively strangled him. For many people, this is the much-awaited centerpiece of their visit to Mount Vernon, the very site on which the great president died.
For the next recipe we're making, it's a very unique fish that Bill is bringing in. That is the sturgeon. Sturgeon is a bottom feeder that when you see it, it eats, it sucks from the bottom as it goes in the bottom of the river. At the 18th century, when George Washington would sit on his piazza and look out the Potomac, story has it that there were so many sturgeon that you almost would want to walk across the Potomac from back to back of the sturgeons. I'm sure you would agree with me that it is not the most beautiful looking fish, right? But it's precious for one of the side products, which is the roe, the eggs. And caviar, which comes from the sturgeon, is spectacular. And let me tell you something. It's one of the greatest commodities that we've had. Spectacular. And the dish we're making today, by the way, which I got from Mary Randolph and the Virginia housewife, this is the exact recipe that I'm making today, that I would assure you had been here many times served right here at the Mount Vernon estate. And it's a stuffed, baked sturgeon that is cooked on top of root vegetables. So right now we're going to get started. We're going to clean this fish, which is not easy. I'm going to take the head. Now this head will make a great soup. The bones are pretty strong. That's how the fish takes his food in. It's also, in my language, it's called a stirrer because it stirs up the bottom of the river bed. So now we're going to do, we want to be careful not to lose a finger. Okay, here we go. Got it right down the middle. Couldn't be better than that. So now what you want to do, no different than you would debone any other fish. You just want to make sure that you take the bone out, the back. And now obviously since I did such a good job already before, you don't have to worry about any spines because I got it pretty good out. You just want to get through it and follow the contour of the fish. Many of the recipes that I read always wanted you to use the tail of the fish. It's the most flavorful part. So the fish is perfect and ready, completely clean, has no bones in it. Mind you, this is the little fatty part of it that gives you the great flavor. And now I'm going to get ready for the crab meat stuffing and show you in a moment how this is done.
Welcome, Walter, to Georgia Martha Washington's kitchen. This is our hearth, and we furnished it with the kinds of cooking utensils that would have been used in Washington's time. The lower level of the floor in the larder kept the temperature down so that food could be preserved in that room a little bit longer.
It's just amazing to me how much activity went on here. It's almost like a country club, if you will, that many dinners were served in here.
Well, it was an unusual volume. The first year that Washington was back at Mount Vernon after the presidency, we know that there were some 600 and some overnight guests. So you can just imagine the amount of food that takes. Welcome to the small dining room here at Mount Vernon. For most of the time that George and Martha Washington lived here until the mid-1780s, this was the only dining room at Mount Vernon used for entertaining their many guests. So it was richly decorated to serve that function. Perhaps the first thing you notice in the room is the very strong green color on the walls. This was made using a pigment called verdigris.
Did you know the general once read that green is the color that promotes appetite best?
Washington was very involved in the decorating of Mount Vernon. When this room was being painted in 1787, he was chairing the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and yet he wrote back a very detailed letter talking about problems with the paint and many other mundane details of housekeeping. This was indeed Washington's grand room for entertaining. What's really interesting about this mantelpiece is the carved motifs carry out the theme of farming that was so important to Washington. You see it up above on the ceiling where Washington specified things like a sickle and these very sort of humble, ordinary farming implements. We're looking at the table as it's set out for 8 guests plus Mr. and Mrs. Washington. At one end, you see we have an example of Mrs. Washington's famous boiled hams. According to her grandson, there was a ham boiled every day, and that was considered one of her specialties.
Baked stuffed sturgeon that I'm doing today is a very complex recipe, but a great one. So don't be afraid of making it because it's dynamite when it's done. What I'm doing next right now, I'm doing a stuffing. I'm using crab meat. The crab could have been right here from the Potomac as well. Crab meat, very simple. I want to put in a lot, when I mean a lot of herbs. The herbs will make it very good, the herb crusting. I have some fresh, we call it mie de pain or breadcrumbs. Ideally, what you want to use is a fresh breadcrumb. I have chives. And I have parsley already chopped, I put in there, and there you don't want to be shy at all. You can never put too much egg in it because it's going to be baked in the oven. Then you can put hot sauce in there, you can put more salt, pepper, whatever you feel like it, and a little bit of Worcestershire sauce, just a bit, not too much. And salt, be careful, because the crab meat usually, that if you buy it already cooked, usually is preserved in salt. A good amount of pepper. Like about so. And then you want to mix it up gently. just like that. I already prepared the sturgeon, but I'm going to show you how it's done. It's actually very simple. You're going to cut a little pocket inside here. Take the stuffing and just put the stuffing into the opening. You can be very generous with the egg because it's later going to cook in the oven and going to get nice and firm. And now what I have a variety of different vegetables, root vegetables, and also some onion. And what you want to do is you want to cut it ideally almost in the same square. You have the rutabaga. What I'm using here is root vegetables that would have been used in the off-season. I have some red potatoes, any kind of potato you could put in there. I have celery yak, which is the root of the celery, I'm saying here. Turnip and a parsnip. And then what I add into it, I like sweet potatoes. Makes great flavor in there. So here we go. Now you want to be generous with some butter. And for this particular recipe, could you use oil? Yeah, I would never use schmaltz. Oil would be okay, but butter would be the best for that. I will take the fish and just place it. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now comes white wine. Good amount of white wine. And we're going to have a little bit more salt on top. A little bit of pepper. And now, this great looking sturgeon, because it's so fatty and so firm, will take about a half an hour to cook. It's not like some other delicate fish that you may used to. So at a high heat, maybe 20 minutes, but could be up to a half an hour at like 375 and 400 degrees. The only thing I got to do once in a while later, make sure that I have enough white wine in it. Let it slowly simmer. Next, we're going to make the citrus vinaigrette that has a story on itself. I'm here at the lower garden at Mount Vernon Estate. Dean, the Director of Horticulture, it's so glad to meet you.
Chef Staib, welcome to Mount Vernon.
So Dean, why do you recommend that we meet out here?
Well, this is a good place to start because in the 18th century, visitors to Mount Vernon weren't supposed to see the kitchen garden. When they sat down to the evening meal, they knew whether George and Martha Washington had a good kitchen garden or not.
There's a great enclosure on this garden.
Well, you know, the most important thing when you established an area as a kitchen garden or a garden of necessity was to protect it. And so a brick wall was the best. It gave you additional warmth. You could start your gardening earlier in spring and extend it further into the fall. And then also landscape-wise, it actually screened it. So when Washington had created his naturalistic design, he didn't want people seeing the kitchen garden. They were still something that would be admired at the table, but not seen within the landscape.
For me as a chef, this garden seems absolutely perfectly organized.
This is a wonderful example of a formal English kitchen garden. A lot of geometrically designed beds and a lot of classic English horticultural practices being used within this garden, such as the espaliers that border your beds. Beyond the espaliers along the walk, you had espaliers on the walls, and they would have been your stone fruit because they needed the additional warmth to survive in the wintertime. The strawberry beds are surrounded by muscadine grapes on trellis. And then in the middle, as a focal point, is a circular cistern. This is an above-ground well. It goes no deeper than what you see, and this was highly recommended by 18th century horticulturists. They had realized that by bringing water up from a deep well brought up cold water, and when put on plants, constricted roots and caused them to basically go into shock. But by putting in an above-ground well such as this, it softened and warmed the water, and then this would act as your dipping well, much more conducive to good plant growth.
If I was a plant, I would love it. I would actually be growing here. So much exposure to the sunlight is spectacular.
That's right. In a kitchen garden, you wanted a southern exposure. You wanted that warmth. You wanted the sun to be able to hit all the plants. The more sun you have, the less diseases you have, the longer season you're going to have, and the better your produce in this garden are going to grow. Plus, Washington created a terrace within this garden so that you had two level areas to plant in, which makes it a little easier to garden and cultivate than on a slope.
So Dean, I couldn't help seeing the spectacular rosemary you got going here. Do you mind if I help myself to a few sprigs for dinner tonight?
Well, you know, it's the herb of remembrance. I want you to grab all you want and remember your great day here at Mount Vernon.
How could I forget you and Mount Vernon?
Thank you very much.
All right, the fish is beautiful. Now I'm getting ready to make my citrus vinaigrette to serve up the spectacular meal in honor of Mary Randolph. In the 18th century, citrus was one of the things that was really, really precious. As we know, the oranges came from Seville. Having beautiful citrus fruit would be displayed in the foyer of the estate. And the help would have been trained to every day examine the fruit to make sure that it was all perfect. So what I'm going to do, now, people ask me a couple times when I make this particular recipe, can you use concentrated orange juice? You could, but don't let me know about it. It wouldn't be right. So basically, orange lemon vinegar, some spices into it, and it's a very, very easy little dish. What makes it unique is the flavor of red shallots or red onion. Red onion has a pungent little flavor, does it extremely well. But red onions in here. I got some chives and some parsley already chopped. I want to put a little bit tomato in it, not just for color, but also for the flavor. Make a small dice, like about so. The 18th century does not have yellow peppers and red peppers and green peppers, we know. There would have been a green pepper that eventually turned blush, like the one I'm having here. And it has a beautiful, unique flavor. Now what I want to do is a little bit more chives. There we go. Now, all it needs is vinegar. I use red wine vinegar for that. Nice amount of pepper. Freshly ground. And salt. Let me mix it up, and what it needs is a quick taste, making sure that, I don't get better than that. Okay, all right. The 18th century would have been served family style, so depending how many people would come, there would have been one of many choices. While we make a recipe, at a normal dinner, you could have had 15 or 20 different main courses and a whole bunch of appetizers and side dishes. 30 dishes would have been common. So I put the root vegetables on the bottom, and then I'll take the sturgeon. I'm going to take a quick lemon. Chop the lemon down real quick. I have my vinaigrette ready. The vinaigrette white over the fish. Now what I want to do is maybe get a little bit of any kind of greens. Maybe do some nice chervil on top. And I don't know about you, but I'm sure if you make this dish at home and you tell people there's a dish that would have been served here in Mount Vernon, it's right out of Mary Randolph's book, The Virginia Housewife. Sturgeon right here, root vegetable, beautiful, beautiful vinaigrette done with the citrus. What a fantastic meal. Right here at Martha and George Washington's kitchen at the Mount Vernon estate.